And we're now coming to the major part of the afternoon, which is to welcome our guest speaker, who genuinely needs no introduction, the very Reverend Gilleasbuig Macmillan, Minister of St Giles Cathedral. Gilleasbuig also, of course, is the Dean of the Thistle and a chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen. He was born in Argyll, raised, I think, in Appin. He's an Edinburgh graduate twice, his MA and BD, and before coming to St Giles, he was minister of Portree Parish Church in the Isle of Skye. He's an author of several books on religious matters, and his honours include the FRSE, honorary doctorates from Edinburgh and St Andrews, and in 2009 he was awarded the Anne-Marie Schimmel Award for championing a Muslim cause. Gilleasbuig and I have two things in common. My middle name is Gilleasbuig, but it's not spelt the proper way, sadly. The other thing is that we're both members of the Harveian Society, which the medical people will know is the Medical Dining Club, which meets once a year in the College of Physicians and honours the memory of William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood. And Gilleasbuig is the chaplain, but he's called Pontifex Maximus, which is a very grand title, and he always gives us a very grand grace. From that, I know that he has a taste in exotic food, because this medical dining club has 7 courses with 7 wines, and the middle course is stuffed ox heart, which in memory of William Harvey, and I've always noted that Gilleasbuig enjoys this particular course. Anyway, that's enough from me, and I invite Gilleasbuig to address us.
Thank you. Has it ever occurred to you that people who say that someone who needs no introduction immediately proceeds to disprove the point? It's nice to be here. My first experience of this university was sitting the bursary competition in Adam House, where on that particular session, 2 of us were candidates. I sitting a paper in Gaelic and another fellow sitting a paper in Russian. And the invigilator said to us, "You two are not going to copy from each other, are you?" And we said, "No." And he then proceeded to leave the room for quite a while, presumably to stand on the pavement to do what people used to do standing on the pavement, or at least one of the things. And it's perfectly obvious that I might have had some Russian and he might have had some Gaelic, but there we are. It may explain why I got a bursary. And one of the benefits of getting a bursary in these days, probably still, is that you had the option of having one of these lovely alcoves up there allocated to you. And it seemed that very few people took advantage of it. I did with relish, because I have always, perhaps having grown up and lived all my life in cold manses, I've always had cold houses, but I've always had houses with space in them. And therefore, I've never particularly enjoyed working in libraries or with other people near me in the room. And I had, I think, the third along there, upstairs, and would sit there for ages writing essays and reading and things. And I think in my time, only one other of the alcoves was occupied. And it was a lovely experience and something that I have remembered with much gratitude. These were the days when, if you came from the Oban area, you came to Edinburgh on a direct rail link from Oban to Edinburgh to the Grand Caledonian railway station, later Princes Street, where you didn't have to engage with things like the Waverley Steps to get to the train. It was a splendid... It left Oban with 2 sections, one for Glasgow and one for Edinburgh, and they divided, usually in my time at Callander, but sometimes I think at Stirling. I remember going home once and sharing a compartment, remember what they were, with a man and a little boy. The little boy was very inquisitive, and his father was trying to be helpful, but the father was also trying to read something. And the little boy was saying, "What station is this, Daddy?" And so he was told it was Falkirk, Camelon, and then Larbert, and then Stirling. And then very, very soon after leaving Stirling, the train screeched and hooted to a halt, and the little boy said, "Where are we now, Dad?" And the father, with his head in the book, said, "Stirling Moss." And since then, I have always thought that that was quite a good name for Bridge of Allen, which it was. In fact, I think I've probably thought of Bridge of Allen as Stirling Moss. You can no longer go by train for that stretch of the line between Dunblane and Crianlarich, a wonderful line, past Loch Lubnig, looking down on Loch Erne Head, over Glenogle, and then the porter shouting out what was also on the sign, "Killin Junction, change for Killin. Killin Junction, change for Killin." And that's what it said on the sign. Now, I would hasten to remove any thought that I might have a theme to what I'm going to say, but the theme Signs of the Times is one which I think you will agree sounds a sort of expectable title for a parson to take. One of the signs which has often intrigued me is the sign on a car saying "baby on board." And you look into the car with some concern because there are clearly no adults there. And after looking at it for a while, you come to the conclusion that either the sign is telling a lie or the baby is in the glove compartment. Equally, garage in constant use. And if the door is open and there's no car there, it's clearly not being used as a receptacle for holding a car. And I suspect that some sort of philosophical point is being made that what garage in constant use means it is always a garage. It hasn't turned itself into, say, a three-piece suit or a pipe tune or the Scott Monument. At least that's what I take it, that's what that means. I have never known what to make of "beware falling rocks." Even in cars with roof windows, there is not much you can do about a rock already 3 feet above you as you drive under it. I suppose it may be an escape clause for the insurance. There is, or recently was, outside the old parish church of Hoyk, St Mary's, a sign which said that the church was originally dedicated, and I quote, "to the memory of the Virgin Mary," a phrase I instantly judged to have been composed by a Protestant who frequented Burns suppers. In a small island in the Outer Hebrides, the minister was bothered by the large number of cars, tractors, vans and other vehicles which were allowed to be rusting on the side of the road in a derelict condition. He decided to do something about it. He procured some official Western Isles Council stationery and typed this message, which he then pinned to the local notice board. Local Government Derelict Vehicles Act, 1979. In accordance with the above Act, this notice is posted to inform appropriate persons that an inspection will be made at the beginning of next month of all vehicles permanently parked on or adjacent to highways maintained by this Council, with a view to ascertaining ownership, insurance, registration and other relevant details so that appropriate action may be taken. I was there on the last Saturday before the beginning of the month, and people were moving, getting tractors and lorries in to remove all the old tractors and cars and buses and things away to the dump, and of course there was no Local Government Derelict Vehicles Act. Campbell MacLean, the Minister of Cramond, used to tell the story about going on holiday to the Western Highlands, where a lovely beach was invaded by visitors, and so they thought they would do something about it. So they put up a notice saying private beach, and that didn't stop them. They put up another one saying beware of the bull, and that didn't stop them. They then put up a notice which was totally effective, which said prayer meeting all welcome. Dr. George Davy was teaching a small philosophy class on the north side of George Square when he suddenly took a chalk and divided an elegant blue Georgian piece of panelling into 4 so that he could demonstrate the fairly obvious point, sort of thing philosophers quite like, that you can see a thing as 1 or you can see it as 4, and then smiled and said, I seem to have destroyed something of their nice plaster. We then moved into the Hume Tower, and Dr. Davy was seen one day holding up a card bearing the words, instructions for tower users, and growling, is that what we have become? Tower users. I have always enjoyed the cartoon of the man standing on a pavement on the opposite side of the road from a bus stop, the bus stop bearing the words, queue other side. Do you see the theme I'm getting to? There were signs on the shore of the Sea of Galilee which were intended to read, beware of western winds, in capitals. But the letter D in winds had been replaced by the letter P, so that they read, beware of western wimps. The rector of Oban High School heard a knock on his door. It was a painter who had been asked to paint the words rector's room on the door. He asked the rector, I believe you want one of these wee commas, where would you like it? The rector thought carefully and informed the painter of his conclusion, I think we'll have it between the R and the S. Very good, sir. If that's where you want it, that's where you have it. These were the days before the use of an apostrophe became a matter of total imagination and freedom. A notice on a prominent church read as follows, the minister is most willing to be of help to any who wish to consult him on any matter. They should call at the manse between 6 and 6:30 on a Wednesday. I've seen that. Leaving London, you see signs to the north. You keep on following them to the north. And eventually, as you're nearing Kyle of Laharsh, you still see a sign to the north pointing to the road to Achnashin. And presumably when you get to Achnashin, there'll be a sign saying to the north, which suggests that the north may not be so much a place as a concept. And that's quite a useful thing to think of. There was a house in this city which had on the gate, in a nice little metal sign, please snake the gate. There's something very admirable about that. I don't know if it was specially made or not. But I snacked the gate and went to the door to be met by Mrs. McCrae. I went to the seat that I normally sat in and noticed that I had disturbed a screwdriver which was on the arm of the chair. And I said, I picked up this screwdriver. She said, it's for you. And I said, oh, yes. And she said, you know my McCrae knocker. Well, I hesitated a bit about that. And I said, she said, you know, on my back door. And I said, oh, yes, certainly. She said, well, a friend of mine admired it. And I had another one from Gray's of George Street. And I decided that what I would do would be to give her the one she admired and put the new one on the door, and you're to change them. So I did. Please snack the gate. I borrowed a car in Seattle once because I wanted to visit Vancouver. I'd never been there. And I drove to Vancouver and parked the car and put lots of money in to last until 4 o'clock. And I went back in about 3:30. The car had been removed. I first of all thought I was on the wrong street because on a sort of grid of norths and souths and easts and wests, you could easily get the wrong place. But eventually I found it had been removed. What I had not seen, although I'd put plenty of money in, was that there was a sign higher up which said no parking after 3:15. And therefore my money till 4 had produced an offence. I was given a fine, so I wrote out a cheque in Canadian dollars on a Royal Bank of Scotland cheque and posted it in America. And I don't know if it ever got there or not. There's a gravestone in the Dean Cemetery which says, in memory of Miss Mary MacLeod, retired nurse. It moves me greatly. For what reason could the lady's retired state be more memorable than her working life? Was she better at being a retired nurse than a working nurse? I mean, there are some people who are much better at being retired teachers or retired this and that. You would think, in fact, they had been far more successful at their careers than their pontification in old age might suggest. there was a memorial to a minister in a church not far from here, which said, "In memory of the Reverend James Scott, an eloquent pastor, a faithful preacher, a wise counsellor, and never an enthusiast." It makes you think. It's nice to have what you might call role models. On the wall beside the door of the Patriarch's Palace in Venice are 2 memorial tablets for the 2 Venetian patriarchs in the past half-century or so who were elected to the papacy. On one side there is a tribute to Pope John the 23rd, beloved Archbishop and Pope who called the Second Vatican Council in his old age, inaugurated the great renewal of the Church and was loved by many. It's long. On the other side is the tribute to Pope John Paul I, who died after a month in the papacy. It is quite short. It makes you think. When we were in Portree, someone painted in huge letters on a rock south of Sconser the words, "Jesus saves." On the following Sunday, I said in a sermon that I thought it was unwise to publicise the second article of the Creed by defacing evidence for the first. In New College, in my time, there was a sign scrawled on a bench in front of some of us, "No Pope here," and somebody had written underneath, "Lucky Pope." A few years ago, I was visiting Grace Episcopal Cathedral in San Francisco, and at the back of the cathedral on big boards were lists of people who had given money to the place. And depending on how much they had given, they were given different titles. I viewed it with a certain amount of distaste, which is probably not shared by some of you here. And they were given titles like prophets and patriarchs. And then one I saw was a list, and they were called cherubim, the plural of cherub. And then I looked again, and I saw that the last 2 vowels of the word had been exchanged, and in fact they were described as cherubim. It seemed a reasonable form of retribution, especially in a church. Signs of the times. Thank you.
When I agreed to give the vote of thanks on your behalf, I was, of course, aware that Gillespie's reputation goes before him for his erudition, for the stimulating nature of the sermons which he gives in St. Giles, which many of us will have heard, and aware of his capacity for wit and entertainment. But I seriously underestimated the pleasure and humour that he would bring and give to us with today's lunchtime address. But I thought his theme of signs of the times actually struck rather well with the preceding General Council deliberations. And I think what I will take away from today, both from that and from today's talk, is about the importance of optimism. If a pessimist is someone who sees difficulty in every opportunity, then I think we have had ample evidence, both in our business and in our pleasure after lunch, that an optimist is someone who sees the opportunity in every difficulty, for showing us the humour in the signs of our times, for entertaining us above and beyond the expectations of the reputation which preceded you, Gillespie. On behalf of all of us, thank you very much indeed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the events this afternoon. it only remains for me to thank Gilleasbuig for a wonderful speech. Thank you all for coming, and to let you know that the next half-yearly meeting is on the 18th of June in the King's Buildings at the University, and our guest speaker is another distinguished graduate, Dr. Iain Macmillan, a retired general practitioner from Edinburgh, a journalist, and in June will be a retired MSP. So we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much.